In 2016, the FDA began allowing women to take mifepristone between 7 and 10 weeks of pregnancy. In 2021, the agency said women no longer needed to see a doctor in person to get the pill. It also allowed pharmacies to ship the drug nationwide. The doctors argued these moves ignored safety concerns about using the pill later in pregnancy and would force them to treat resulting complications. Conservative Justice Brett Kavanaugh, who wrote the opinion, explained that the doctors did not meet the threshold for bringing the case. He said the doctors, quote, do not prescribe or use mifepristone, and FDA is not requiring them to do or refrain from doing anything. Therefore, the plaintiffs lack standing to challenge FDA's actions. For more on this, let's bring in CBS News legal contributor Jessica Levinson. She's also a professor at Loyola Law School in Los Angeles. Jessica, great to be with you as always. What stood out to you about this ruling on both the issue at hand and also was the court sending any signals to the lower courts that had previously ruled on this?
I think it is. I think it is sending a signal that the standing jurisprudence stands, that it is not going to undermine what is required for any person or group to walk into the courthouse doors. This is a very strong statement, as you said, a unanimous statement. Justice Clarence Thomas concurred, but he agreed with the outcome here, that in order to say, federal court, hear my case, you yourself have to be injured, not somebody else, not your neighbor, not your partner, not your friend, but you have to have that injury. And what the court said with respect to the doctors is, it can't be enough that you say, I might have to at some point treat somebody who has a rare side effect from mifepristone. This is not a group of doctors that prescribe mifepristone, and they are protected from having to treat somebody based on federal conscience laws, meaning if you have a genuine moral or religious objection to treating somebody by using mifepristone, then you are protected from having to do so. And that's really what stood out to me, is frankly that it's somewhat remarkable that this case ever got to the Supreme Court, because it's a fairly clear application of the court standing doctrine.
And I've asked you to do it before, but I'll ask you again. Briefly, standing is a really important principle in jurisprudence. Remind people why it's important.
It's important because you yourself have to be the person that is injured when you go into court. It's the court's way of controlling how cases get brought before them. It's the court's way of saying, you don't get to say, you know what, I just don't really like what's happening over there or over there to those people. What you have to say is, I have an injury in fact. It was caused by the government action I'm complaining of. And if I win, then my injury can at least in part be remedied. So it is a procedural threshold that is in part every federal court's way of controlling who gets in the doors. And it's our way of making sure that federal courts only resolve true controversies and cases, not just giving advisory opinions. Here's what we hypothetically think.
Mifepristone remains on the market now. What other kinds of challenges might it face in the legal sphere?
So there is still this case, the remnants of this case that is pending in the trial court before Judge Kaczmarek. He did allow 3 states to intervene in the case, Idaho, Missouri, and Kansas. And so the case could continue with them as the plaintiffs. Now, the question is the same. Do the states have standing? And they're asserting a slightly different claim here. Their claim is that their interest in making sure that, for instance, they can ban abortions is undermined by the FDA saying, yes, you can obtain mifepristone through telehealth. And what they're really arguing is that it's a federalism issue, that this infringes on state sovereignty. So depending on what Judge Kaczmarek says, this case could come back up again to the Fifth Circuit and then again to the Supreme Court.
And finally, Jessica, the court hasn't issued its final word this term on abortion. There's still one case pending over Idaho's near total abortion ban. Remind us what's at play there.
So what's at play there? Completely different question. There is a federal statute, and it says if you come into an emergency room, then you are entitled to necessary stabilizing treatment. Separately, there is a state law out of Idaho that says you only get an abortion if it's necessary to save the life of the mother. And so the question is whether or not those two things conflict. Maybe an abortion is a stabilizing treatment, but it is not necessary to save that woman's life at that moment. And so what we're going to have really is something called a question of preemption. If the two things truly conflict, then we know what happens. Then the federal law wins. But that's the other big, quote unquote, abortion case that we're waiting for this term.
Jessica Levinson, thank you so much, as always. It was a day of unanimity on the High Court Thursday. Two other rulings came in at 9-0. The full lineup said the National Labor Relations Board had used too broad a standard in forcing Starbucks to rehire 7 Memphis-based workers who were trying to unionize their store in 2022. Starbucks had claimed that they were fired for other reasons. But the court's ruling focused not on the facts, but just on the standard, which may now be narrow in terms of the ability of the National Labor Relations Board to temporarily stop what it deems to be unfair labor practices. Also on Thursday, the Supreme Court ruled a political activist could not trademark the phrase "Trump too small." The phrase is a reference to a juvenile claim Florida Senator Marco Rubio, now on the short list to be Trump's VP, made about Donald Trump's anatomy in 2016. California attorney Steve Elster wanted to trademark the phrase he used to sell T-shirts, which list what he calls Trump's small positions on issues from the environment to health care. A lower court blocked him. Elster sued, saying he had a First Amendment right to the trademark, and the Supreme Court ultimately reaffirmed the lower court ruling that you cannot trademark other people's names. Before Thursday, the last time Donald Trump heard his supporters cheering his name on Capitol Hill, those supporters attacked the Capitol on January 6th in an effort to disenfranchise 81 million voters who picked Joe Biden to be president. Trump, who lost that election, was cheered this Thursday by his congressional supporters who back his latest bid for the White House. Though some of those supporters once blamed him for the attack on January 6th, which put their lives in danger, and blame him for doing nothing to stop it while the violence was being done in his name. He met with Republican lawmakers in what has been described by members of the GOP as a unifying event for the party's presidential nominee. Trump also met with some lawmakers on his shortlist for vice president, which he will announce at the Republican National Convention next month. Leaders from the group of 7 major democracies kicked off their annual summit in Italy Thursday. Day one started with a show of support for war-torn Ukraine. The G7 nations will give the country a $50 billion loan, paid for with interest on frozen Russian assets. In a New York Times op-ed Thursday, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen wrote, "It is time for the United States and our allies to unlock the value of immobilized Russian assets so that Ukraine can get the financial support it urgently needs." Also Thursday, President Biden signed a 10-year security pact with Ukraine. Biden spoke at a news conference with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky.
A lasting peace for Ukraine must be underwritten by Ukraine's own ability to defend itself now and to deter future aggression anytime in the future.
CBS News Chief White House correspondent Nancy Cordes reports from southern Italy. Nancy?
Good evening. President Biden stood on the stage behind me a short time ago, and alongside the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, the two men signed a historic agreement. This would essentially commit the U.S. to supporting Ukraine for the next 10 years with military assistance, military training, intelligence sharing, all designed to send a message to Vladimir Putin in Russia that the U.S. is not going anywhere, that he can't simply wait America out, as President Biden said. That was just one of several major developments on the Ukraine front here in Italy today at the G7 summit. The G7 leaders, including President Biden, came to an agreement to provide a $50 billion loan to Ukraine using the interest from hundreds of billions of dollars worth of Russian assets that have been frozen around the world since shortly after this invasion began 2.5 years ago. That is money that Ukraine will be able to use starting as early as this year to rebuild its shattered infrastructure, build power plants, and to build up its own capacity to produce weaponry so it doesn't have to rely quite as much on the U.S. and on other nations around the world. President Biden, in the press conference that followed that signing, was asked about his son's conviction on felony gun charges earlier this week. It's the first time that President Biden has spoken publicly about that verdict. He said that he will abide by the verdict and that he is not going to pardon his son. He was asked if he would consider commuting his son's sentence when that sentence is handed down a few months from now, and he paused and then responded, no.
Nancy Cordes reporting from Italy. Thank you so much, Nancy. On the sidelines of the G7 summit, President Biden expressed doubts that a ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas would be reached anytime soon. The president called Hamas, quote, the biggest hang-up for refusing to support a U.S.-backed proposal, which has been endorsed by the UN Security Council, the G7, and Israel. His comments come just a day after Secretary of State Antony Blinken said some changes proposed by Hamas to the ceasefire deal were not workable. Meanwhile, the Israeli military is continuing its offensive in Gaza. Israeli tanks advanced deeper into the southernmost city of Rafah Thursday. As Chris Livesay reports, tensions are also escalating between Hezbollah and Israel along the northern border.
Well, Israel and Hezbollah continue to exchange fire at the southern border with Lebanon. The Iran-backed militants launched 40 rockets into Israel, the second day in a row of clashes after Israel killed a senior Hezbollah commander yesterday. Today, Israel said it struck Hezbollah military structures in Lebanese border villages. After the Hamas massacre and kidnappings of October 7, Hezbollah stepped up its attacks on Israel, sparking fears of a much broader war in the Middle East, as Israel's southern and northern borders. Since then, Israel has evacuated roughly 80,000 people from the border with Lebanon. Meanwhile, the hostages freed over the weekend are beginning to speak about their experiences. CBS News spoke to the parents of Andrei Kozlov, who told us their son suffered both physical and mental abuse. They say he spent months with his hands and feet tied, forcing him to eat, quote, like an animal. They told him his family and his country had abandoned him, adding to the shock he experienced when those Israeli commandos burst into the house he was trapped in and rescued him. But for all Kozlov was willing to share, he told his parents, there are things I experienced I can never tell you. John?
Chris Livesay in Tel Aviv. Thank you, Chris. Senate Republicans voted Thursday to block legislation that would protect the right to in vitro fertilization. Advancement failed on a vote of 48 to 47, with just 2 Republicans joining Democrats and independents. It needed 60 votes to clear the threat of a filibuster. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer spoke after the vote, warning of a new threat in the fight for reproductive rights.
The anti-abortion movement is laying the groundwork to go after IVF next. By blocking the Right to IVF Act, Senate Republicans have fallen in line with MAGA extremists who have made it clear IVF is their next target.
The move in the Senate comes one day after the Southern Baptist Convention voted to formally oppose IVF as a means of getting pregnant. With 13 million members, the group is the country's largest Protestant denomination. Its views tend to fall in line with the Republican Party and vice versa. Still to come, how many migrants have been caught along the borders illegally and how many have gotten away? Our Camila Montoya Galvez joins us ahead to break down the numbers behind America's current asylum system. Plus, a record-threatening heat wave is headed for the East Coast. Our David Parkinson will patiently explain to us what a heat dome is and how long this one is expected to last. You're streaming the Daily Report.
Coming up, our series. Wait a minute. Tom, is that you working the camera?
Keep leaning out of your close-up.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
I had progressively fallen deeper into the world of online sports betting.
The risk is the rush.
What do you think is driving the spike in popularity?
I think it's legality.
If it's legal, I'm going to use it. There are ways to bet when you are 18.
We've created an epidemic of child gambling.
You can't walk into a male dormitory in a college campus without sports betting happening.
It's America's most neglected problem.
I used sports betting as a way to escape, when in reality, I'm choosing self-destruction. Whatever I had left, it was gone.
The purpose of the industry is to get you to play to extinction. And that means until all your money is gone.
Go to the ends of the earth. Reach for the stars.
Yeah, I just took off. That kind of thing.
Oh, that's pretty good.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
That desired farm is a wonderful place to raise children, and it still is.
Promises broken.
Black Americans have been the target of racism and discrimination pretty much from the time they acquired ownership in the land.
Costing black farmers hundreds of billions in generational wealth.
They did everything to make sure we were run off that land.
But communities are uniting to continue the fight.
Collective ownership is powerful.
To keep their land and their dreams alive.
To watch my children play on land that we own means everything.
So land is power.
Most definitely.
40 Acres and a Mule, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
People with developmental disabilities were once sequestered by the hundreds of thousands in institutions.
Many of our fellow citizens are suffering tremendously because lack of attention, lack of imagination, lack of adequate manpower.
Disability activists have since torn down barriers blocking them from living at home or in the community.
We conclude that Title II of the ADA requires states to provide community-based treatment for persons with mental disabilities.
But of the 16,000 people who remain in state-operated institutions, half are in 5 states, and Illinois is one of them.
I don't want to live in the institution. It makes me feel discriminated against.
Do you think there are people living in institutions in Illinois that don't need to be living there?
Yeah, because they're proving it as soon as they get out.
Almost a year after Chinese hackers broke into the email accounts of federal offices, Microsoft is accepting responsibility for the cyber attack. Chinese hackers stole 60,000 State Department emails and gained access to Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo's inbox. The company president, Brad Smith, testified before a House panel on Homeland Security Thursday, 2 months after a government advisory board released a report about the July 2023 hack.
We're here for an important reason. It starts with the role this committee plays, the protection of the homeland security of the United States. And the reality is you cannot protect the homeland security of this country without protecting the cybersecurity of it as well. And that is a shared responsibility between the public and private sectors, and hence what you do to oversee us and others in the private sector is critical.
Microsoft President Brad Smith also testified about new security plans to upgrade Microsoft programs. It's been more than 3 years since the supporters of Donald Trump damaged the U.S. Capitol on January 6th, but many offenders still need to pay up. Out of the hundreds of offenders who pleaded guilty or were found guilty of their actions on that day, a review by CBS News found that only 15% of the court-ordered restitution payments have been recovered. That money is supposed to go to things like police injuries, repairs, and cleaning up the damage done by rioters. The Justice Department and Capitol administrators estimate the cost of the cleanup and repairs to be in the ballpark of $3 million. So far, only $437,000 have been reimbursed by January 6th offenders. Last month, the world recorded its hottest month on record, and now meteorologists say a heat dome currently centered over Mexico and the Southwest will shift this weekend, repositioning over the east by next week. It's expected to cause record-high temperatures across multiple cities. CBS News senior weather producer David Parkinson joins us here on set. David, before we get to this specific heat dome, would you remind us what a heat dome is?
Sure. So a heat dome is basically an area where you've got high pressure over the country, and essentially, or any part of the world, really. It could be in Asia, it could be in Africa, it could be in Europe, and we've seen that already as well. You've got high pressure over an area, and it's pushing down. So all the hot air at the ground can't escape up, right? Hot air likes to rise. Well, it can't do that, so it just keeps the hot air down at the ground, and it really just sort of broils the temperatures. And that's what we're seeing right now. It's causing drought conditions in Mexico because it's drying out the ground because, again, it's so warm and it doesn't have anywhere to go. And then that has extended up into portions of the Intermountain West and the Southwest. That is going to shift to the east, and you will see it in the Northeast and the Southeast over the next week or so. But the problem is when these happen, they often lock into place. And that's what we're seeing, John, is that this heat dome, particularly over Mexico, hasn't moved in weeks. And in fact, one of the real concerns that we have is climate change is enhancing the heat domes.
Which is my next question. So are they, A, more frequent because of climate change, and or B, are they hanging out longer because of climate change?
Yeah, so yes to both.
Okay.
So this is what's called the Climate Shift Index. This is something that Climate Central has come up with, and it basically shows you the likelihood that the heat that's going on is related to climate change. This is 5 times more likely that this heat is caused by climate change in the Southwest. Again, this is in the Southeast for Saturday, somewhere in the 3 to 4 times more likely. Down here in Mexico, this entire area, 3, 4, 5 times more likely that it's being caused by climate change. So all of these heat cases are being enhanced by climate change. The other thing is, one of the theories is that the jet stream is not moving in the way that we would predict it to because of climate change. When the jet stream gets locked into place, you have these record temperatures staying in place. And so that's a double dose of climate change causing these problems.
And so now viewers in the Northeast are going, I heard about the Northeast. So tell us what's going to happen in the Northeast as this moves.
Yeah, so this is Saturday. This is the first dose of this heat wave as it moves to the east. So you're seeing triple digits in Atlanta. This is also not a dry heat. So in the Southwest, it was a dry heat, not in Atlanta. That 99 is going to feel close to 105. The 100 in Baton Rouge will feel close to 106. This will then shift to the north basically all next week. So beginning, let's say, Tuesday, but really Wednesday through, let's call it Saturday. All of those days, we're looking at 95 degrees in the Northeast. I saw a 97 for Hartford for one of the days, so that's incredibly impressive, that far north into New England. Then you add the humidity, and you bring yourself to a heat index of 104, 105. That's going to start the middle of next week, go all the way through next weekend. It's locked in. It's our first heat dome, but it will not be our last heat dome of the summer, unfortunately. And this is dangerous heat because once you're outside and you have those humidities, you can't evacuate the moisture with the sweat you might have. So that's another problem where you get more heat-related diseases and heat-related sicknesses because of the conditions that we're seeing.
I want you to come back when we're talking about a mild temperate dome. I want one of those domes, David.
They never invite me when the weather's quiet, John.
Yes,
So.
well, we'll find a way to do that. David Parkinson, thank you. Florida is no stranger to heavy rain, but recent storms have now prompted a state of emergency in some areas. Cars are stranded and schools are closed after rolling storms brought severe flooding. Take a look at these aerials of the Miami-Dade area, which saw more than a foot of rain over just 2 days. Even after this week's deluge, more rain is in the forecast for southern Florida. And here's Mike Bettis from our partners at the Weather Channel.
Well, flooding rain, severe thunderstorms, and also extreme heat, all in our forecast as we get closer to the weekend. We know the ongoing issues in South Florida, high-risk day for flooding. That will continue into the evening. Some isolated pockets of another 3 to 5 inches of rain on top of what we've already seen. It's 3 to 4 months worth of rain in some locations. Severe thunderstorms likely here from Michigan all the way back into the Central Plains here. Storms rumble through the evening and overnight. Could include areas around Kansas City, outside of Chicago, across the Ohio Valley. Valley, 75-mile-per-hour winds could take down trees or power lines, could see golf ball-size hail or bigger. Storms return tomorrow off the Front Range, including around Denver, Colorado, and Colby, Kansas. Storms getting close to I-95 as well, so it's been a nice week of weather, but now the storms come rumbling in tomorrow that could include areas in and around Boston. Then there's the heat as we get closer to the weekend with high pressure dominating. Look at some of these temperatures even after the weekend. 98 in Cincinnati on Monday. And for more coverage, you can check us out on cable and now live on your favorite TV streaming device.
Mike Bettis, thank you. When trapped in a small space with dozens of other people, one is bound to experience some annoyances. YouGov has put out a new poll of what Americans say are the worst plane etiquette practices. The most unacceptable practice, letting children play in the aisle. 86% of respondents said this should not be done. Leaving one's seat during turbulence is second worst, with 82% against it. 81% oppose making your own movie a public showing by watching without headphones. And in a decades-old debate, 74% said using both armrests is unacceptable. Opinion was more evenly split on removing shoes, which caused us to inquire whether this practice was a matter of personal health or just selfishness. Some think this ungodly practice might help with blood circulation to the feet. However, it actually poses a greater risk of exposing feet to bacteria and unclean areas. Doctors instead recommend compression socks on long flights to reduce the risk of blood clots. Coming up, Tesla shareholders agree to pay CEO Elon Musk a new multi-billion-dollar pay package. We'll tell you how much more one of the richest men in the world is getting. You're streaming The Daily Report.
On our places, bright shiny faces.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team. Nate has one of the quickest minds I've ever seen.
Tony has a way of making people feel comfortable.
Gail has this unbelievable knack to ask the question that you're asking at home.
I've been told I could talk to a tree, and that's pretty much true.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my two good friends, and we talk about the world.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
It didn't seem like anything could happen, because nothing ever happens in East Palestine, but it did.
Authorities released toxic fumes from 5 derailed train cars.
Resident, please evacuate.
Acute bronchitis due to chemical fumes. Did you ever have these problems before the derailment? No, ma'am.
This neighborhood's not safe no more.
We can assure the community that there's not vinyl chloride entering their communities.
Then why are there so many people feeling these various symptoms of bloody noses or difficulty breathing, bronchitis?
That's a hard question to answer.
We're talking about one of the most blatant releases of a mixture of some of the most toxic chemicals that we've seen in America.
I feel like now I have a duty to warn other communities. If my daughter has to watch me die of cancer, at least it saves someone else. This case.
It's like a screenplay, something straight out of Hollywood.
But it's not fiction. It's 48 hours.
Human remains found this week.
4 families shattered.
There's no physical evidence.
The mystery would haunt investigators for years.
There's some questions that have to be asked and need to be answered.
Like a John Grisham novel.
A gripping true crime original. 48 hours. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform.
You can be really old at 60, and you can be really young at 85.
Inspire.
How do we unlock the power within ourselves to be who we want to be?
And brighten your day.
The best part of fame is making people feel good. Always send the people home happy.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Dragon capsule here in space.
sightseers in space, the thrill of a lifetime.
Seeing the Earth from space, it was so exhilarating.
But the risks that come with the territory.
There have been 4 fatal accidents. That's a 1% fatal accident rate.
Might make you look before you launch.
If you had 1 out of 100 airplanes falling out of the sky, we'd have a public crisis.
Space tourism, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Welcome back to the Daily Report. I'm John Dickerson. Here are some additions to our top stories. The Supreme Court issued a unanimous ruling preserving access to the abortion pill mifepristone Thursday. The justices ruled that the group of anti-abortion rights doctors who sued the FDA did not have the legal grounds to do so. The court is set to rule on a second major abortion case in coming weeks about whether hospital emergency rooms are required to perform abortions in urgent situations. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky joined the leaders at the G7 summit in Italy Thursday. The group agreed on a $50 billion loan to Ukraine, and President Biden signed a U.S. security pact with Ukraine aimed in part at putting it on the road to NATO membership. The Ukrainian leader called it a historic day. In Havana, a long line of people braved temperatures in the high 80s to tour the Russian military ship in Cuban waters. One local said she had been waiting since the early morning, and another said he wanted to learn what life is like for the crew. The Russian military arrived Wednesday for exercises in the Caribbean. It's been about 1 week since President Biden took executive action to restrict the asylum system. Since then, the ACLU has filed a lawsuit charging that the Biden administration has broken asylum law. To put both in perspective, we wanted to step back and look at the U.S. immigration system, particularly the treatment of those who seek asylum. The U.S. refugee and asylum system was created in response to the World War II refugee crisis. Millions of people had lost their homes in the destruction, and millions more Jewish Europeans needed a place to go. Over the years, the system has been modified several times, and it currently provides protections to foreigners fleeing persecution based on certain groups, such as their religion and their political views. Today, there is a quota system in place limiting the number of refugees allowed into the U.S. each year, but there is no cap for the asylum system, which has become massively backlogged. CBS News immigration and politics reporter Camila Montoya Galvez joins me now with more on the current state of the asylum system in the United States.
Hi, John. A lot of the conversation on the immigration system starts at the U.S.-Mexico border, so let's begin with that. Over the last 3 years, the number of times U.S. Customs and Border Protection has encountered migrants has reached record levels. Included in those figures are encounters at official border crossings and the number of people illegally entering the U.S. Repeat border crossings are also included in these metrics. So when a migrant is encountered, there are several options for what happens next. Some people are deported, expelled, or returned to their home countries or Mexico. About 4.3 million people over the last 3 fiscal years have been deported or expelled from the U.S. Generally speaking, however, migrants who claim asylum can do so if they're physically on American soil. For those who do claim asylum, they have to wait for the U.S. to make that decision, and they are generally allowed to stay here pending that review. Over the past 3 years, U.S. Customs and Border Protection has released 3.2 million people. When someone is released, John, they are not allowed to work here legally until 6 months after they formally apply for asylum. They're also not eligible for federal benefits, but may have limited access to social services depending on where in the country they live in. There are currently around 3.7 million people with pending immigration court cases, and 1.3 million of them have already formally applied for asylum. If someone is granted asylum, they immediately become a legal resident in the U.S. and are allowed to begin the process towards American citizenship. People who lose their cases are supposed to be deported from the U.S., but it gets a lot more complicated than that. And that is because the number of people requesting asylum has soared as the number of encounters at the border has also grown. And has the time to make that decision has also grown. That time has also grown. And right now, the average wait time for asylum hearings is around 4 years. And then there's a longer wait for an actual decision, which leaves migrants in limbo for years. But in the meantime, many of them can work in the U.S., even if they won't ultimately qualify for asylum, which again is only for people fleeing persecution, not economic misfortune. And finally, there's another category of migrants that we often hear about in the news, the so-called gotaways. These are migrants that the Department of Homeland Security defines as people who evaded Border Patrol apprehension but were detected on cameras or sensors. Over the past 3 fiscal years, that number has increased, as you can see. These migrants are in a legal gray area without any status, and so they are not eligible for jobs and are at risk of being deported if they are apprehended here in the U.S., John.
Excellent work, Camilo. So how did this system get so broken? And when I ask that, I'm really asking about the asylum system, right?
Yes, you are. The U.S. asylum system, John, simply put, was never designed or built to address and accommodate the extraordinary migration flows that we have seen over the past 3 years. Millions of people have been entering the U.S. across the U.S.-Mexico border over the past 3 years, and many of them are claiming asylum under our laws. And that is a seismic shift because, yes, illegal crossings were also high in the early 2000s and in the 90s, but many of those migrants were Mexican men looking for work who were not applying for asylum, and many of them were sneaking into the country and were not entering the system. Right now, many families, adults, and unaccompanied children are actively looking for federal agents, John, to begin the asylum system. But that process is massively backlogged, as you mentioned, and legally speaking and also operationally speaking, it is not meant to address the needs of many of these migrants. Why do I say legally in addition to operationally? Because ultimately, these migrants may have very sympathetic cases and may be fleeing very desperate circumstances, but many of them will not meet the very high legal threshold, John, that is needed to win asylum.
One of the things that I learned was when you described what happened in the 90s and early 2000s, those were the gotaways that you described in your...
That's right.
And this new situation is different. Thank you for helping me understand those kind of two big categories. Now, let me ask you about the ACLU before we go away. They have sued the Biden administration saying that this new order restricting asylum is breaking asylum law. What can you tell me about what's going on there?
Well, the Biden administration last week issued a partial ban on asylum claims. People who cross between ports of entry at the border are now banned from asylum. There are certain exceptions, including for unaccompanied children, but that is the general rule. If you cross into the U.S. illegally, you're no longer eligible for asylum, and you can be quickly deported. The ACLU says that that violates U.S. asylum law because for many years that has been interpreted to mean that if you are here on American soil, John, you can request asylum, even importantly, if you enter the country illegally. The ACLU importantly sued over a very similar Trump administration regulation, and it was successful in convincing federal courts to block it. And they tell me that this is nearly identical to that regulation. But obviously, only time will tell if the courts agree with them.
Camila Montoya Galvez walking us through the thicket of all of this so well. Thank you so much, Camila. Southern Ukraine is recovering after Russian forces launched a round of fatal air attacks Wednesday. At least 9 people were killed and 29 wounded in the attack on an apartment block. The strike came after Ukraine's military said it successfully shot down dozens of Russian projectiles earlier in the day. Ukraine credits its renewed supply of anti-aircraft missiles from Western allies. There are also reports the United States is planning to give Ukraine a second Patriot air defense system, but Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin did not confirm those plans when asked about it on Thursday. Russian officials have decided that jailed American journalist Evan Gershkovich will stand trial on espionage charges. Gershkovich, a Wall Street Journal reporter, has been detained in Russia for more than a year. He's accused of allegedly spying on a facility linked to the Russian military on behalf of the CIA. Russian officials have not provided any evidence to support those claims. The top U.S. hostage negotiator says the move was, quote, not expected, and hoped the U.S. would have been able to broker a deal to get the 32-year-old home before this happened. The Biden administration says Gershkovich is being wrongfully detained. A trial date has not been set yet. He faces up to 20 years in Russian prison if convicted. The number of Americans filing for unemployment benefits hit a 10-month high last week. New jobless claims rose to 242,000 for the week ending on June 8th, surpassing previous projections of 225,000. That's also up 13,000 from the prior week. It was the third straight weekly rise in claims, and some economists say the new data could encourage the Federal Reserve to start cutting interest rates later this year because higher unemployment means employers have more workers to choose from and don't need to raise wages to get them, which helps control inflation. Tesla shareholders have voted in favor of Elon Musk's multi-billion-dollar pay package and to move the company's official home to Texas. The payment package would grant Elon Musk about $46 billion in compensation. The vote comes after a Delaware judge avoided Musk's previous 2018 pay package plan, citing that the Tesla board was beholden to its CEO. It's the latest pay package for the CEO of an S&P 500 company. CEOs of those companies, on average, receive a nearly 13% salary bump last year. An analysis by corporate data company Equilar showed that the average S&P 500 employee would have to work at least 200 years to make what their CEO made in 2023. Applying to college can be an exciting step into adulthood for many young Americans, but it can also come with some major stress. Coming up, we'll look into the FAFSA fiasco that turned a program meant to aid future students into a source of anxiety. You're streaming the Daily Report.
Washington is the seat of power. National security, foreign policy, global economics, every story comes through Washington in some way. We bring some of the most powerful voices in America to the table. We don't just ask the questions, you have to go deeper. We try to understand what's at the heart of the issue we're talking about, to then come forward with solutions.
Face the Nation on CBS.
The justices ruled that Harvard and the University of North Carolina violated the Constitution.
In the aftermath of the Supreme Court decision to end affirmative action in college admissions, uncertainty sets in for some students of color.
Affirmative action really gave us an equal opportunity.
CBS Reports explores the historic decision and what it means for those chasing an opportunity to change their lives.
I knew that college was the ticket to break this cycle.
The end of affirmative action, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Okay, let's go. You guys good?
Hey.
All right, we good?
Keep going. The clock, it's ticking.
Off we go.
60 minutes. 60 minutes.
60 minutes.
It's time for 60 Minutes, Sundays on CBS.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
AI is among the most world-changing technologies ever.
Curing diseases, scientific breakthroughs, making lives better.
They can help us with medical discoveries, scientific discoveries, doing better agriculture, having cures for things like Alzheimer's.
It's also going to really transform the way we work.
The uplifting potential of artificial intelligence is limitless.
It gives you a friend, somebody to chat with 24/7 that is non-judgmental. He makes me feel loved and desired.
And so are its downfalls.
The problem with all this AI is that it's unpredictable and uncontrollable. The choices we make now will have lasting effects for decades, maybe even centuries.
The ChatGPT revolution, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
We are about to see American weapons in the hands of Mexican cartels.
A gun pipeline to Mexico.
We are arming the cartels.
100%, no doubt about it.
Happening right under our noses.
Who's doing something about this? Nobody.
A CBS Reports exclusive.
Most Americans have no idea that we are effectively arming the enemy next door.
This is the story the American people need to know.
Arming cartels, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
America Decides, taking you inside American democracy.
The most important stories on a day-to-day, hour-to-hour basis.
You're going to hear a lot of reporting.
It is clearly a pivotal moment.
Gun control, the economy, education. Both sides of the political aisle fight it out for power.
Bringing you the analysis that you need.
Thoughtfully, with context.
Be part of the conversation.
On CBS News Streaming.
Welcome to America Decides, Monday through Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern.
For students whose dreams of college hang on whether or not they can scrape together the money, federal aid is a key part of that dream. This year, frustration as improvements to the application caused a slew of technical glitches and processing delays. The complexity was born from an attempt to make it easier to fill out the free application for federal student aid, known as FAFSA. Legislation in 2020, the bipartisan FAFSA Simplification Act, mandated that the Department of Education revamp the program by the start of 2024. Revamp it they did, right into the ditch. By mid-February, colleges and universities were forced to push back their enrollment deadline because students couldn't square their finances in time to know if they could say yes to an acceptance. Liam Knox joins me now. He's an admissions and enrollment reporter for Inside Higher Ed and has been following the story of FAFSA's issues since the beginning. Thank you so much for being with us. You and your colleagues have spoken to dozens of students who had issues with the new FAFSA rollout this year. What were some of the things that they told you about how they were affected by its issues?
Well, they had a wide variety of stories, and they're as different as they are damning about the process this year. We spoke with students who are first-generation students, who are low-income students, middle-class students whose families went through the same anxieties. One in particular stands out. We spoke to a family in New Mexico, a father and a son. Son is a first-generation college student, both of whose older siblings have already gone off to college without a hitch, applied for the FAFSA, got federal aid that they were entitled to, and didn't run into any major problems. Of course, this year they ran into some very difficult technical problems with the new FAFSA. They were basically completely unable to fill out the form. When we spoke to them a few weeks ago, this was long after the traditional May 1st commitment deadline for most colleges. The son, Emiliano, still hadn't been able to complete his FAFSA form. This is a student who wants to go to college, who's done everything he can to prepare and try to get the help that he needs, that he's entitled to federally. And he's got a supportive family behind him, counselors behind him. But because of so many delays, issues with the new form, missteps, calculation errors that pretty much plagued the entire rollout of this form over the past 6 months, he may have to defer that dream. He may have to abandon it entirely, and he's not the only one by any stretch.
I talked to a first-generation young man whose parents couldn't help him at all, and he was trying to navigate this just by himself. Incredibly stressful. Why did these issues happen in the first place?
Well, you got to go back, I think, as your graphic illustrated, a couple of years to the congressional mandate of the FAFSA simplification process. The idea itself was a good one. The old form had a lot of problems. It was archaic in many ways. It was complicated. That in and of itself was a barrier to access for many students. And so there was a congressional mandate, a law passed to simplify the FAFSA. What ended up happening is the Department of Education, for various reasons, and there are too many to really go into in a lot of detail right now, but basically had to delay the launch of the FAFSA by many months at first. They have to do with, a lack of funding from Congress. They have to do with issues with contractors. They have to do with,
And briefly, Liam, before I lose you, Education Secretary Cardona says the issues are fixed. Is that accurate, or are we going to see this happen again next year?
Well, as one financial aid professional told me, fool me once, shame on me, fool me twice, shame on you. I think a lot of people are skeptical of that. The department has done a lot to improve things. FAFSA processing turnaround time is much better. A lot of the big calculation and inflation mistakes have been resolved, but plenty of students are still having problems with the form, particularly students from mixed status families whose parents don't have Social Security numbers are still unable to fill out the form. And there's a lot of catch-up being played right now, and I think that's going to make it hard to meet that October deadline, but we'll see.
Liam Knox, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Pennsylvania Senator John Fetterman was involved in a car accident in Maryland Sunday that sent a 62-year-old woman to the hospital. According to a newly revealed police report, it was the senator's fault. The report says Fetterman was seen speeding before rear-ending the woman's car. But this doesn't seem to be the first time. According to public records and the Washington Post, Fetterman has had multiple instances of unsafe driving, so much so that he was required by the state to complete a driver's improvement course, and his own staff reportedly have a fear of riding with him. In a statement, the senator acknowledged he needs to do better and drive more slowly. We now know which city is allegedly the happiest in the U.S. And no, it's not us here in New York. You heard about the heat dome, right? But up next, we'll tell you which city took the top spot and what landed it there. You're streaming the Daily Report.
Go to the ends of the earth.
Right now. We got something crazy.
And reach for the stars.
Here we are. Time.
Yes, it's my comeback.
Hey, this is pretty fun.
But wait, there's more.
Experience thought-provoking,
I'm open to the idea of being a human being.
innovative, and truly original reporting.
Look through a telescope and go, wow.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
At this moment, terrorists could be plotting another attack.
9/11 triggered a counter-terrorist system that included a secret database.
This person needs a closer look.
A growing list of nearly 2 million people, including some Americans who say they're innocent.
For 1 hour flight, I have to spend 6 hours to go and come back.
CBS Reports explores the system, the people responsible for it, and those pushing for change.
I'm not fighting against them. I'm fighting for them to do the right thing.
The Watch List, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Don't miss true crime anytime you want, anywhere you go. With the 48 Hours podcast. Real crimes, real lives, real justice.
There's some questions that have to be asked and need to be answered.
Listen to 48 Hours on Apple Podcasts.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
Imagine yourself in Manhattan with no police, no army, no mayor.
The people of Haiti stare down poverty, corruption, natural disasters, and violence.
90% of the guns that are used by gangs in Haiti are American guns.
But with an unbreakable spirit and eternal optimism.
There are days where I cry, but we can't be discouraged. We still believe in Haiti.
They're still able to look ahead with hope.
Haiti is on the brink of transformation, a radical shift. Haitians are coming together and saying things must change.
Fighting for Haiti, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Hey there, welcome to The Uplift.
I thought she was a groom, and I stepped back and I went, oh, you're the queen. She's going to be with me every instant that I'm alive.
I just wanted to see if you'd go to Disneyland with me today.
I look over at him and he's smiling.
I'm going to remember that the rest of my life.
They told us when he was going to be born, he was only going to live for 30 minutes. It's really a miracle that he's with us today.
The Uplift. Stream now on the free CBS News app.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
On our places, bright, shiny faces.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my 2 good friends, and we talk about the world.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings.
A CBS News investigation. People looking for love, finding their life savings gone.
This could happen to anybody.
And sometimes losing their lives. Anything for love. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
A new study finds men eat more meat than women, and not just in the United States, but around the world. Researchers surveyed 28,000 people across 23 countries in 4 continents about their daily eating habits. With few exceptions, they found that the more financial and social freedom people had to make choices about food, the gender disparity around meat grew larger. The study itself didn't investigate why, but scientists have a theory that the role of men as hunters in some cultures has led to society viewing meat eating as a masculine activity. You are looking at present at the happiest city in the United States. It's Minneapolis. That's according to a new ranking from the London-based research firm, the Institute for Quality of Life. Minneapolis was the only American city to earn gold status on its recent global list. It was ranked highest in the U.S. because of its quality of the education system, social inclusion, transportation accessibility, and more. Even without the coveted gold status, the next highest ranking cities in the U.S. were Boston, Baltimore, Washington, D.C., and San Francisco. Must have been made by Brits. Here are some stories we're covering in our next hour. The Supreme Court preserves access to mifepristone. What was behind the justice's unanimous decision? Plus, G7 leaders gather in Italy with a non-member taking center stage. More on the new agreement to help Ukraine. And a heat dome heads east. We'll explain what exactly a heat dome is and what it means for the East Coast this summer. We are streaming the CBS News.
Okay, so let's just start at the beginning.
Well, let me start with this.
What is at stake here? What is the answer then?
Do you know why? You want me to just keep going?
Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Were there death threats?
How is this possible?
What's wrong with that argument?
Are you saying they lied?
Have you told the government that?